I'm Allie Buckman with the Potomac Bead Company, and I am going to show you today how to play with some round duos, creating a Queen Anne necklace. This necklace was designed by Honey Greene, one of our customers in Ohio, and it's using our fun RounTrio beads. The RounTrio, if you're unfamiliar with them, are a 3-holed round bead that is 6 millimeter and has 3 holes. We will be using all the holes of our RounTrio bead once we get started on the project. You can also do this project with the faceted RounTrios if you like that look of faceted. There's just not as much of a doming effect. That one sits more flat because the facets make it a tiny bit smaller, and this one has much more of a doming effect. This is one component. We're going to be making 3 components total. I'm actually switching colors. These were kind of my fun trials. I'm going to be using the RounTrios, in this green luster color. If you need any of the materials for this bracelet, you can check on the left-hand side here. We'll put a little drop down to some of the different materials that are used. Also, underneath the video, there's a little description box that says about what the video is. If you click the Show More button at the bottom of that, it'll give you links to all of these materials as well. Per component, you're going to use 8 of the RounTrio beads. Again, I'm using that green color. You're going to use 8. You can make as many components as you'd like. Honey, when she showed me the design, used 3 components, so that's what I'm going to stick to. You can also change up the number once you know the pattern, change up the number of the beads and increase them greater than 8. It just gives a much different effect when you're looking at it. In addition to those RounTrio beads, again 8 per project, I'm going to be using and making 3 of them. You're going to be using the Potomac crystal Rondelles. I'm switching colors from the amethyst to a little bit more springtime. It's nice and sunny out. I'm going with the crystal AB for that crystal color to go around the outside and the inside of this crown. For the color that is used in the example, it is the tanzanite color in case you want to go with that. I've stuck with the same 11-0 color, and that's the DC Galvanized Champagne. So it's a Miyuki 11-0 in the Galvanized Champagne color. It has a nice, pretty brassy gold look to it. So it's going to go with a lot of different beads. In addition to my beads, I am using green wildfire beading thread. You can get about 5 feet, and that way you can keep going if you don't want to rethread your needle after each little component. But each component is going to use about 30 inches of thread. After the components are made, we'll string them together, and I'll show you the chain that Honey designed to attach them all together. In addition, we're using that size 10 beading needle, and that's going to be used to put your wildfire beading thread on. I do have some super new glue sitting here if people like to glue their knots after they're done. And I have my thread burner. The thread burner is used to burn down and fuse the edges and get that end of your cording nice and tight down next to the project. You can also use your thread burner or your cord cutter to use the wildfire thread as well. Once you do that, it usually creates a little bit of a blunt end. You can use your needle nose pliers in order to flatten that out, which will make it a lot easier for you to thread your needle. I am working on my bead on it board, and that is a nice heavy board that's made in the USA. You can also work on a bead mat or whatever is comfortable for you that will stop the beads from rolling around. To get started, I am going to be using all the different products. So I'm going to make a little pile, and again about 5 feet of thread if you want, or you can just do about 36 inches, get one component done, and then cut for the other components. So we're going to start out actually making the first component for my actual design that I'm working on. And we'll get ready to start that as we cut our thread and get it on the needle and get ready to go. To get started, I have my 8 round duos laying out and a pile of my 11-0s. I also forgot to mention in that first little clip that you will use 12 of your crystals per unit. To get started on the bracelet, or on the necklace, I have my thread, and I'm going to take and pick up a bead that's just on my bead board but is not part of the project and make a stop bead. I'm going to take that bead down to the end of the thread until I have 1 inch left, just enough to tie onto, and take my needle and thread through that bead 2 times away from that little stop tail there. From there, I'm going to put on all my round duos. In between the round trios, I am going to put one of the 11-0s. I'm picking up one of the side holes. So there's 3 holes in the round trio. I'm going to be picking up one on the right or the left. It doesn't matter which one you pick up right now. You just want to make sure that you're on an outside hole. Once I have all 8 of those on, I'm going to make it in a circle then to get that first step. This Queen Anne necklace does start out with the outside and then moves to the inside of the project as we finish it. As I put on the 8, I let them all drop down next to that stop bead and add the last one on. As you finish adding the 8, you want to make sure that if you started with a round trio, you end with a seed bead. If you did start with a seed bead, you can end with a round trio, but you want to make sure that there are 8 round trios and 8 seed beads on. I'm going to skip over that stop bead, making sure that it's not part of my project, and sew through that same first hole of the first round trio bead that I put on my thread. That's going to create our round loop that starts this Queen Anne. From that bottom hole, I'm going to step up to the middle hole by taking my thread and needle, which are coming out this round trio, and backing it the other way, going through the middle hole of that round trio bead and pulling the thread tight. I want to pull the thread tight and make sure that that circle actually stays in a circle, and that stop bead you just kind of want to push out of the way. From there, I'm going to go back around this little crown of round trios and add an 11-0 between each of the center holes of those round trios. So it's going to look like one seed bead is sitting right on top of the other seed bead. So you have one going the whole way around. We're going to go that full distance, adding in 8 new seed beads. And this also is just a pretty look. If you wanted to continue around, could start with 2 and then your outer row would have 3 beads between it. A very simple pendant design. After you've gone the whole way around, I'm going back through that bead that my thread is coming out of, through the center. I'm going to go through the first seed bead that I added, and I'm going to go through the next round trio. So I went back through that first seed bead that I added in the middle, as well as the first round trio that I sewed through. Here I'm going to do another step up, reversing my thread from the middle hole of the round trio that I'm coming out of to the last hole of that round trio. Because I'm using green thread on a green bead, you really won't see much of the thread poking out or in view at all. In between my round trios, as I go to pick up the last hole of the round trios, I'm going to add one of my crystals. I sew through a round trio, and then as I'm coming out an empty hole before the next one, I'm going to pick up 4 seed beads. These 4 seed beads will decorate the end of my round trio. I add my 4 seed beads and I sew back around in a circle with my needle coming back, entering near the crystal and going back through that round trio bead. I then pick up another crystal, go through a round trio, and pick up 4 more beads. Circling around that round trio and going back through that same hole. This is where you get that raised, puffed up version that's happening, because those round trios, the area between them is actually a little bit greater than the crystal. Continue putting a crystal between the round trios. Give a nice tight pull because you do want that taut, and add 4 beads. So back through that same one. As you sew back through that round trio, again give that some pressure and pull on your thread before moving on to the next one. I'm going to go through this loop right here and add the rest of my 5 crystals with those 4 seed beads on top of each round trio. I'm getting ready to add the last crystal in, and I'm going to go through that first round trio bead that I was coming out of when I added the first crystal, add my 4 11-O's, circle back through the round duo, or the round trio, and I'm actually going to come out the first crystal that I added onto the pattern. To get that pointed edge and to get the project to even bend a little bit more, the pattern calls for another 11-O to sit in between the 4 11-O's that we just added on the side. To achieve that, take your needle through 2 of the 11-O's and up the corner there. Add on another 11 and down through the next 2 11s. Through a crystal. You can see that pops that little corner there. Give a pull. So up through those 2 beads on top of the trio. Add another 11. So down the 2 beads and through a crystal. So this is just adding a point there at the ends of all the trios. At the same time, it also pulls it a little bit tighter, getting a little bit of that doming effect, which will happen even more as we add the middle. Go through the whole project, sewing up the first 2 beads on top of the trio, adding another 11, sewing down those 2 beads and through a crystal. So this time around we are adding nothing but our 11s, and we're just adding 8 individual 11s on that outer row in between our groups of 4. I'm coming out the last group of 11s here, creating my final peak. And as I do so, I'm going to sew through those last 2 11-O's as well as that first crystal. When I sew through that first crystal, I'm going to sew through the outermost hole of the round trio next to it. Pop one out. Once I'm out that round trio, I'm going to go back through, snaking back through the round trios, going back through that outermost hole. Going to come back down that middle. And then I'm going to go back through the bottom hole. So it literally is an S shape through the holes of the round trios. That's going to get me back to the middle of my project. At this point, I want to take that stop bead and move it down a little bit to the back of the project so I can end my thread, at the back of the pendant here. Once I have that, my thread is going to be coming out between a round duo and an 11-O from the very inner portion of our little Queen Anne's crown here. I'm going to then sew through an 11 and come out before a round trio. For this center row, and to get a base to add my crystals in the middle, I'm going to add 3 11-O's and sew my needle through the next 11-O after that round trio that I'm next to. Again, add 3, sew through. So you can see that little rounding effect that the seed beads are having. Continue adding 3 seed beads and sewing from 11 to 11 from that very first row. I've gone around the whole portion of the inner side of the round trios, adding those 3 beads in between each ending 11. As I went through to the end here, I went back through that first 11. When your needle and thread is coming out at that point, we are going to go and come out the second of those first 3 beads that we added. So we added 3 beads above that round trio. That first one, I'm going to go through beads 1 and beads 2 and pop out. When I pop out there, I'm going to add 1 of my crystals, go to the next section of my 3 beads here, pick up the middle bead, bead number 2, and sew through that. The next time I get to that middle bead, I'm just going to add 1 11/0 seed bead and sew through that middle bead. After the seed bead, I add a crystal and sew through that top middle bead. After the crystal, 11/0. So you're adding a pattern of 4 crystals separated by 4 11/0s, always picking up that topmost 3rd bead. As you circle around, you can pleat it. You can see I'm pulling tight. If you want to and you think it would help you, you could also add different colors here for this bottom 3 beads as well as the outer beads. That can help to count if you do have trouble counting the middle. I'm going to add in my last crystal. And because I started with a crystal, I know I need to end with a seed bead. So I'm going to end with my last 11/0. My crystal that I first added is coming out of the 2nd bead. I'm going to sew into that 2nd bead next to my crystal. Bring my needle out. And I'm also at this time going to sew through that crystal. And that'll get that last bead to kind of lay in place. What I'm going to do now in order to get that middle section all connected is we added a bead in between all of our crystals. That bead sits a little bit up and on the outside of that little diamond pattern there. I'm going to sew through the 11 and then we sew through a crystal. Sew through the 11 that we added below, sew through a crystal. So you're connecting all of those final 8 beads that you added. You're going to see a little bit of thread poking out from these because we are pulling them closer together. I've gone once around and I'm going to pull that thread. I'm then also going to go one more time around, and this time as I go around, I'm going to add another 11/0 seed bead and just pick up the crystals. So that 11 will sit right on top of that little pyramid. It almost looks like a Christmas tree in there. Pick up a seed bead, sew through the crystal. So I'm adding 4 new seed beads, sewing through the crystals. You then have your little center component, and what I'm going to do to make this center component pop up just a tiny bit more, I'm going to reinforce that last loop that I made interior here by adding those 11s in between my crystals. So I go through and reinforce it, pulling snug between those beads. As I get back around to the area where my stop bead is along the back of the project, I'm going to get my needle to meet at the back here so I can tie off the threads. You can see on the side that I'm almost to that point. So I'm going to continue sewing around the project until I get there. Even though it's the crystal beads too, it has that AB, you won't see a lot of that green thread. If you would rather see the bright crystal behind, you can use the green thread, that's up to you. I did this little sample in purple so that way you could see it a little bit better than that crystal. Another idea is that you could actually do different components with different color crystals or different color round trios. Once I'm pretty much lined up with that stop bead along the back, I'm going to take my needle and just poke it between two beads, right where it's coming out, so I know where it is coming out right along the end. I want to do my knot at the very back of the project, but I want to get the knot close together so there's not a balled up piece of string right there. I'm going to take my stop bead and pull it out a little bit from the project. Sometimes you can do this easily and sometimes you need to put a needle back on that end. Usually I can just pull it out a little bit. So I have it pulled out just enough that I can see exactly where I need to get to with my thread. I'm going to snake back through my beads, my seed beads on the sides here, in order to not have any thread showing and to bring my thread and needle out at the same point where my thread is for the start. Once those thread ends are next to one another, I'm simply going to tie an overhand knot. Turn that into a square knot by switching hands, that I'm holding the tail ends. Do that again to get that last knot in place. You can then trim down or burn down that thread end. It's going to sit there until the very end of our project, till I make those other two components. Once those other two components are made then, I need to change my battery out here. Once those other two components are made, then we will go in and actually glue down and get rid of all of those ends. But I'm going to leave a little bit on so that way I get ready to take this one component and add in to make two more, and then my chain going along to do the design as well. So again, I'm just going to do the exact same thing 2 more times to get 2 more components to create my necklace. So I finished my 3 components, just showing in case you would want to see the look if you added more. There's one with 4 going. You can kind of imagine, here's the faceted one, to do a couple more if you did want to do more. I'm just going to do the 3 that I was originally planning on. And to connect those, I'm going to do a beaded chain. In Honey's design, she uses the crystals, so we're going to use those, and we're using the gold beads around those crystals. When I get started, I have a long piece of thread to use, and I'm going to put on a stop bead and leave about 10 inches of thread at the end of the stop bead. We'll go back and add the clasp after the fact. I'm going to start out by adding and creating the left-hand side of the chain. To start that, I'm just going to move my components off to the side a little bit and dump out some of my 11s and my crystals. It depends on how long you want the actual necklace to be. That will determine how many crystals you'll need in order to do so. To start out, I'm going to add 3, 4, 5 11-ohs. Then a crystal goes on. You put the crystal rondelle onto your thread and drop that back next to those starter 5 beads. We're then going to take 4 seed beads, so back through that crystal in a rounded fashion, which is going to poke or put those 4 seed beads on the outside of the crystal. Again, add 4. And then again, so in from the stop bead end towards the long piece of thread, and that'll decorate the other side of our crystal. So it makes a nice little decoration on the outside of the crystal. You can then choose how far you want to separate these. I'm going to use 3 crystals in between, or 3 seed beads in between each of my crystals. You can go 1 if you want to, you can do 4. I'm picking 3 because I like the look of that. It creates a nice almost diamond chain look. On goes the next rondelle, and at the same time I have that crystal on, I'm going to pick up my 4 seed beads. Let all of those drop to the end of my thread, and then take my needle and thread again, starting at the stop bead end, going around in a circle back through that crystal. Once I have my beads through that crystal, I'm going to add my 4 on the other side of the crystal to decorate. If you wanted to, you could even do this with some 15-0 seed beads, would make it have a little bit more delicate look. I'm just using those 11-0 champagne that I had. I'm going back through that bead. After each crystal, and you have those beads on the side, you want to make sure to push it down next to the last one that you did. I'm going to continue this almost daisy style chain till I have about 7 inches, 6 or 7 inches, so I can add my first component to it. Continuing on with the 3 seed beads in between, and then the crystal, 4 seed beads on, going back through the crystal, 4 on the other side, and then coming out. Once you have that daisy chain partially finished, you want to go a little bit less than halfway. I have here again about 6.5 inches. I strung the daisy chain through my first little round duo piece. When I start stringing it through, I have 2 of my 11-0 seed beads. Normally I've been doing 3 in between. I do 2 because I'm coming out that 11, which would make it consistent and have it be that 3 beads in between. I'm then going to continue with my thread and needle through the outer edge of the RounTrio little Queen Anne part here, and I'm going to sew through my 11-0s, my crystal, my 11-0s on the back end there, coming out those 11-0s. I'll skip the point piece, skip over to the other 11-0s and come out the next point. So I'm basically skipping 1 point in between. You can change this up depending on how you want it to lay and how many pieces you're using, but I'm just skipping 1 point. Once I'm out that point on the other side, I am going to continue my chain. So I'm going to go in here and continue the chain by adding 2 more seed beads, picking up a crystal, and adding my 4 beads on the side. If you want to, you could also add 5 beads on the side of your crystal, or do the picot trim like we did here, that you go back and add another bead in between. I have those 4 beads on the one side, I'm going to add 4 on the other. And then from there, all we do very simply is add 2 more beads and get to our middle component. You can separate the components out more if you'd like by just adding more of the beaded chain between each. I like it to look full here at the bottom, so I'll add them with just 1 bead in between. That center component, I'm going to do the same thing that I previously did by going into one of the corner beads and letting that sit right there. So you can see how they'll be spaced out. From there, we're going to do the same sort of turn. So I'm going to skip one of my corners and come out the 3rd corner in the row. So you're sewing again through those ends. And I turn over the piece. This is why I don't want to glue those components. If you are somebody that glues, you don't want to glue any of the knots yet because you have to sew through those components. As I sew up and around through the components, again, I'm going to skip this first peak here that I went into and coming over to the next one. Once you come out that peak, you want to make sure to pull so that your piece sits correctly. From there, again, we're coming out of the piece, adding 2 seed beads, and then our crystal with our seed beads on each side. And then we're going to add the 3rd piece, just like I did the 1st and the 2nd. Sewing back through those crystals, adding my beads. I'll push all of that down next to my project to make it nice and tight. Then adding 2 beads, pick up your third component. You want to make sure all of your components are facing the same way too. So make sure as you add them that you're adding them from the left side to the right. I'm gonna add this last one here. You can start to see the look of the piece now. It has a really pretty look to it. You can make this as simple or as advanced looking as you want. The nice thing is it doesn't take very long to make the individual components, and you can make the chain as simple or advanced as you want. The more components you have, the less chain you'll actually have that last little bit. I'm going to sew over after skipping the 1 point and come out that point on the other side. Once I come out that point, I'm ready to add my last of my bead chain on. So the bead chain I'm just going to continue adding after adding 2 beads. So I add those 2 beads onto my thread, and you can see the chain that I've done on that side. I'm going to continue adding my little daisy chain here until I get the length that I desire along the back. I've gone ahead and finished the end of the chain on each side. Just to give you an idea, I used 19 crystals on the end. It made about a 17-inch necklace, plus those 2 crystals that are there in the middle. So about 40 crystals makes your beaded strand. To end the necklace, I will be using some wire guardians or wire protectors, and then I'm just going to use a classic little spring clasp here and ring. The reason I'm using the wire protectors is because I like when I'm at the ends of the necklace, if I am using thread and a metal clasp, I don't want the thread kind of running right along the metal. If you haven't used wire protectors before, that creates a little U channel for your clasp to sit in. I'm going to start with the end that I'm currently working on because the needle is still attached. After you get to your end of your last little crystal there in that daisy chain, you are going to add your 5 seed beads, just like we did at the start. Push those down next to your last bead and add a wire protector. You're going to go into the end of the wire protector. Then I'm going to put on my clasp. Then I'm going to run the wire and thread through the other, the thread and the needle through the other side of the wire protector. Make sure when you pull that your thread sits right in that little U channel. I'm going to sew down through several of my seed beads and sew through my crystal. To reinforce that, to make sure that there's at least 2 strands going through, I'm going back through all of my 4 seed beads on the end, on the side of the crystal right there, giving a nice tight pull, getting rid of any slack that's there at the end. I'm going to go back through those 5 seed beads, back up to the very top clasp portion. Once I get back to the top here, I want to reinforce the thread going through that wire protector. So I'm running it back up that U channel. To the other side of the U, making sure you're going through that clasp as well. And then I'm going to bring the thread back into the project and end it a little bit further down. To do that, I'm just going to run straight down the middle of the daisy chain, going through the seed beads and the crystal, through the next set of seed beads, and once I'm through that next set of seed beads, I'm going to tie the thread off. To tie the thread off, I'm going to do a double sewer's knot here. I'm going to make a loop, catch in between that bead and the crystal, there at the base, sew through that loop 2 times, and give a nice tight pull and get that knot right into the base. Sew down a couple more beads and do it again. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. To get to the other side, if you want to, it's going to get tight, a little bit tight along the actual beaded sections that we did. But if you want to, you can actually, if you have enough thread, sew back through the whole entire baseline of the necklace. And that will give you a little bit more strength along the chain. Once I have the last portion of knotting done, you can see I popped out to the side to do this one, I am going to glue that knot a little bit. I'm done this first side that I just attached the clasp to. I'm going to pick up my super new glue here, drop a little dab of glue on that knot, and then pull that knot inside the bead. Let that dry a little tiny bit. You're going to take your thread burner, got my new batteries in here, you're just going to burn that off. I'm going to let that dry a couple more seconds, burn that off, and then I'm going to flip over to the other side and do the same thing, adding the other side of the clasp. As you finish your design and burn off your extra little threads there and add the other end, it makes a nice 17-inch necklace. Again, if you want it a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, you can make up for that in the middle of the pendant pieces, or you can make up for it in the chain length as well. Again, if you want to challenge yourself, you can make more components. That way it actually has more on the necklace, which is a very kind of modern look to it. The chunkier jewelry that you see in a lot of designers going on. And it's a nice feeling, very professional, very classic looking necklace with very little effort. A lot of necklaces like this take days to make. This one, because of the size of the round trios and the multiple holes, you can make it pretty quickly. So it's a really nice design by Honey Greene that I think will do well, that really will be a statement piece when you're wearing it. If you haven't got a chance to get the materials before, again, you can get them at the start of this video. We have links, or right at the end in the little drop down where there is details about the video. In that click down little show more will give you links to the specific products that were used to make this wonderful Queen Anne necklace. And if you need any of the materials, you can also go to your local Potomac Bead Company store, shop with them there for the materials, and they'd be happy to help you with this design and many others as well. If you do want to stay connected with us, you can subscribe to this channel to get regular updates when there's different videos that come out, whether or not it's a tutorial like this one or product update. We'll send you all the new stuff. You can also join us in conversation on Facebook in our jewelry and beading and jewelry making group. You can ask to become part of that, and we'll add you in so you can exchange your ideas, your designs, ask questions, and get a lot of interaction with us as well. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and hopefully you have as much fun as I did making this Queen Anne necklace.